He never noticed the exact moment his life began to lose its depth because it did not fall apart in a single dramatic failure. It thinned slowly through repetition, through days that demanded presence but never invited meaning, through mornings that arrived without purpose and nights that ended without reflection, until waking up felt less like beginning something and more like continuing something. He no longer understood, and for a long time, he accepted this rhythm without questioning it, mistaking routine for responsibility and exhaustion for effort, telling himself that being busy meant being productive, that surviving each day was proof enough that he was moving forward, even though deep inside there was a quiet tension that never fully left him, a subtle awareness that his life was expanding in activity, but shrinking in direction, that he was moving constantly, yet going nowhere, and this awareness did not scream for attention, but waited patiently in the background of his thoughts, especially during the late hours when the world slowed down and excuses lost their strength. When he would lie awake staring at the ceiling and imagine a version of himself that lived with intention, discipline, and control, a version that respected time and honored effort, only to wake up the next morning and abandon that image again by choosing comfort over growth, familiarity over challenge, and avoidance over accountability, until one ordinary morning introduced an unfamiliar pause, a hesitation so small it could have been ignored, where he sat on the edge of his bed longer than usual, not scrolling through a screen, not drowning himself in noise, simply sitting with an unease that had no clear explanation, an unease born from the realization that nothing external was actively blocking his progress, that no single person or circumstance was responsible for the state of his life, that his position was not the result of one major mistake, but the accumulation of countless small decisions repeated daily without intention. And as the day unfolded with the same structure it always had, the same tasks, the same pressures, the same expectations, he remained unusually aware, watching his own behavior as if from a distance, noticing how instinctively he reached for ease the moment effort was required, how naturally he delayed meaningful actions by promising himself a future where he would somehow feel more motivated, more prepared, more confident, slowly understanding that later was not a point in time, but a hiding place, a place where responsibility went to disappear and self-respect slowly eroded, and this awareness did not energize him, but drained him, exhausting him more than physical labor ever had, because awareness removes excuses and leaves only truth behind. And by evening, the weight he felt was not the result of a difficult day, but the result of seeing clearly for the first time, realizing that his tiredness did not come from trying too hard, but from resisting discomfort day after day, from negotiating with his impulse, from allowing emotions to dictate actions, and standing alone in the quiet of his room, he began to understand something that felt both unsettling and grounding, that motivation had never failed him because it was never meant to lead his life in the first place, that motivation was temporary and unreliable, arriving only when circumstances were easy and disappearing the moment discipline was required, and what he lacked was not desire but structure, not ambition but consistency, not intelligence but control over his daily behaviors, and without governing how he woke up, how he used his mornings, how he responded to resistance, how he managed his time, how he treated his own promises, no external change could ever stabilize him, and in that moment, there was no dramatic vow, no sudden confidence, no emotional high, only a calm and serious acceptance of responsibility, a decision that felt small on the surface, but carried weight beneath it, the decision to stop pretending that circumstances were in control and to accept that his daily actions were shaping his future, whether he acknowledged them or not, understanding that real transformation does not announce itself loudly or arrive as inspiration. It begins quietly and almost invisibly when a person accepts full ownership of how they wake, how they work, how they think, and how they repeat these choices every single day. Knowing that nothing around him had changed yet, his environment was the same, his position was the same, his struggles were the same, but something fundamental had shifted internally, because the moment a person stops waiting to be rescued by motivation or time and starts governing daily behavior with intention, the direction of their life, though slow and unnoticed at first, has already begun to turn, And that realization, heavy and silent, marked the true beginning of his transformation, long before discipline became visible, and long before the world would ever recognize the change that had quietly started inside him. The days that followed did not announce themselves as different, yet he moved through them with a subtle, almost imperceptible awareness that had not been there before, a quiet lens through which every action, every choice, every small decision began to carry meaning as he discovered the extraordinary weight of the ordinary, the immense impact of seemingly insignificant actions, titled without reflection, and he began to notice the tiny, almost invisible patterns of avoidance that had shaped his life so far. How he habitually postponed challenging tasks, how he filled the silence of his mind with trivial distractions, how he had long let his impulses dictate his hours, all the while believing that life was something that happened to him rather than something he actively created. And slowly, almost painfully, he started to confront the reality that transformation was not a distant event or an occasional surge of willpower, but a daily negotiation with discomfort, with boredom, with resistance, a recognition that the resistance was not external but within, and that every moment he allowed himself to be passive, every time he chose comfort over effort, he was silently cementing the life he had always complained about. Yet, on some mornings, he found himself waking with a curious tension, a mixture of restlessness and anticipation, not fully understanding why until he realized that this tension was the call of discipline, a subtle reminder that the only way to grow, to evolve, to break free from the quiet erosion of repeated inaction was to take ownership of the smallest elements of his day, the order in which he approached his mornings, the commitment to seeing through tasks he usually abandoned, the conscious choice to engage with his thoughts rather than distract them, the deliberate decision to honor promises to himself even when no one else was watching. And as he began experimenting with this awareness, he discovered the paradoxical truth that the world did not have to pay for his life to transform, that internal consistency, small daily victory, and self-directed intention could create a foundation so solid that external circumstances, no matter how chaotic, became navigable. And yet, with each small victory came a new challenge, the subtle resistance of his own mind, the temptation to return to old patterns, the almost magnetic pull of comfort and distraction. And every evening, as he reflected, he saw clearly how easily he could sabotage progress if he allowed the inertia of habit to dominate. And so he began to understand that transformation is not a straight line, it is not a single leap, but a layered, ongoing process of confronting one's weaknesses, honoring one's potential, wrestling with the mind's natural tendencies toward ease, and consciously choosing action over and over, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, recognizing that these repeated choices, though invisible in isolation, accumulate over weeks, months, and years to become the architecture of a life that is not merely survived, but deliberately constructed. And that the most remarkable aspect of this realization was that it offered a freedom unlike any he had known before, the freedom to stop blaming circumstances, to stop waiting for luck or opportunity, to stop hoping for an external force to intervene, and instead to harness the immense power of internal consistency, to use daily choices as the leverage to shape not just moments, but the trajectory of existence, so that even though nothing outside him seemed to change at first, the inner shift was profound, a silent, undeniable gravity that pulled every decision, every thought, every action into alignment with the person he was beginning to become, a person who did not wait for life to happen, but made it happen, slowly, deliberately, relentlessly, knowing that this was only the beginning, and that the true measure of transformation would not be seen in the immediate, but in the long arc of days lived with purpose, with integrity, with consciousness, and with the relentless, patient act of choosing himself over distraction, effort over ease, and action over As the weeks unfolded, he began to notice the subtle power of persistence in ways he had never imagined, realizing that transformation was not a single climactic event, but a series of deliberate choices repeated quietly over time, choices that initially felt inconsequential, but gradually accumulated into a tangible sense of control over his life. And with each passing day, he observed himself with increasing clarity, noticing the tiny ways he had previously surrendered his hours to distraction, the countless moments in which he had allowed fear or laziness to dictate his actions, and he began to experiment with the deliberate alteration of these patterns, forcing himself to confront tasks he would have once avoided, to endure boredom instead of seeking constant entertainment, to sit with discomfort rather than flee from it, discovering that the mind, when challenged daily, slowly begins to accept a new standard of expectation, that effort becomes familiar and ease no longer seductive, and in this process he encountered moments of frustration, days when the old habits seemed to resurface with renewed intensity, when the temptation to revert to passive routines was almost irresistible, but each time he resisted, even slightly, a new layer of resilience was woven into his character, a quiet but undeniable confidence that whispered each morning, each evening, and even in the quiet moments of inaction that he was learning not just to act, but to act in alignment with his highest intentions. And as he applied this awareness across his daily existence, how he began his mornings, how he structured his hours, how he treated commitments, how he navigated challenges and interruptions, he realized that life's pressures, which had once felt overwhelming, now became opportunities to reinforce the discipline he had chosen to cultivate, and that the freedom he experienced was unlike any external reward, for it was born not of luck or circumstance, but of repeated internal alignment, the ability to maintain direction even when the external world offered no acknowledgement, no applause, no immediate validation. And with this realization came another profound understanding that success, fulfillment, and growth are rarely dramatic or visible at first, that they accrue quietly, invisibly, almost imperceptibly through the repetition of small, deliberate actions, through the refusal to allow excuses or comfort to dictate outcomes. And as he continued this relentless practice, he began to experience a subtle but pervasive transformation in his own perception of time, of energy, and of responsibility, recognizing that each moment carried immense weight, that each choice either reinforced the life he desired or continued to cement the one he had always silently complained about. And in seeing this clearly, he found not despair but a sense of power, a calm determination that allowed him to confront even the hardest tasks, the most uncomfortable truths about himself, with a steady, unwavering resolve, knowing that the life he was building would not be instantaneous or obvious to others, but that the internal foundation being forged in these silent, repetitive actions would eventually manifest as a life of coherence, integrity, and control, a life in which he would not wait for change, but actively create it. And even though the journey was long, arduous, and often invisible to the outside world, he understood that the momentum he was cultivating was irreversible, that the habit of intentional action had taken root, and that nothing external, no circumstance, no judgment, no failure could undo the cumulative force of the choices he had consciously begun to make, day after day, minute after minute, until the man he once was, who had drifted through life unaware and unintentional, was quietly replaced by someone capable of steering his own destiny with a patience, focus, and internal authority that would define the rest of his life. In the days and nights that followed, he became increasingly aware that transformation was less about sudden breakthroughs and more about the patient accumulation of tiny, conscious choices, each one a subtle assertion of control over his own life. And he began to notice patterns in his thinking that had previously gone unnoticed, the automatic justifications for avoidance, the habitual surrender to ease, the countless ways he had allowed small discomforts to dictate his actions. And he realized that mastery of self was not a lofty ideal, but a practical, moment-to-moment commitment to act with intention, to resist the seductive call of comfort, to honor promises to himself that no one else was watching, to confront boredom, frustration, and fear not as enemies, but as necessary companions in the forging of character. And as he practiced this relentless self-observation, he discovered an unexpected clarity in his perception of time, of energy, of the immense consequences of decisions that once seemed trivial. And he began to see that life was an intricate architecture built from these daily choices. That every neglected moment, every surrendered opportunity, every time he chose distraction over discipline had contributed to a life of quiet dissatisfaction, while each deliberate action, each act of focus, each engagement with his responsibilities began to silently, imperceptibly reshape his trajectory. And in this realization, he found a strange liberation, a freedom rooted not in external circumstances, but in the knowledge that he could, at any given moment, choose differently. That the power to alter his future lay not in luck or opportunity, but in the disciplined, repeated, conscious use of his time and attention. And as he continued along this path, he encountered resistance not from the world, but from within. The mind's habitual pull toward ease, the instinctive discomfort of confronting oneself fully. The subtle fears that had long gone unacknowledged, yet each time he faced these inner obstacles and acted despite them, he added a layer of resilience and confidence that no external validation could provide. And gradually he noticed that the most remarkable changes were internal. A steadiness of mind, a clarity of purpose, a sense of integrity that anchored him even when external circumstances were chaotic or unsupportive. And as this internal foundation strengthened, he realized that the long-term rewards of this practice would be invisible at first, accumulating silently like the slow growth of roots beneath the surface, eventually supporting a life that was coherent, intentional, and self-directed. A life in which he would no longer drift, react, or postpone, but act deliberately, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, with the awareness that each choice reinforced either the life he desired or the life he had always quietly complained about. And in embracing this, he finally understood that transformation was not a future event to hope for, but a present practice to live, a continuous negotiation with discomfort, distraction, and habit. And that as long as he maintained this vigilance, the momentum of intentional action would become unstoppable, irrevocable, quietly guiding him toward a life of integrity, purpose, and self-mastery that no circumstance could undermine. Because the real power of transformation lies not in fleeting motivation or external change, but in the relentless, consistent, patient commitment to shape one's own mind, one's own day, and ultimately one's own destiny. As the days stretched into weeks, he began to notice subtle shifts in the way he experienced life, the slow but unmistakable effects of repeated, intentional action, and he realized that the journey of transformation was not a linear path, but a continuous, intricate dance with his own mind, his own habits, and his own choices. Each moment a chance to either reinforce the inertia of the past or create a foundation for a future shaped by conscious effort, and he began to observe, with a precision he had never allowed himself before, the tiny patterns of avoidance, the habitual surrender to ease, the automatic justifications for delay, and how these invisible threads had long governed the texture of his life, keeping him from the fullness of potential he had always sensed but never acted upon. And in recognizing these patterns, he felt a mixture of discomfort and liberation, for awareness alone had the power to change the equation, to provide the leverage necessary to alter outcomes that had previously felt inevitable. And so he began a deliberate practice of self-governance, structuring his mornings not around distraction or obligation, but around clarity, intention, and small victories. Confronting tasks he had habitually postponed, sitting with thoughts he had once avoided, enduring discomfort without fleeing, and honoring commitments to himself as fiercely as he might honor commitments to others. And through this relentless, repetitive attention to the ordinary elements of his day, he discovered the extraordinary consequences of consistent choice. Noticing that while external life remained much the same, his internal landscape was subtly, profoundly shifting, creating a quiet yet undeniable authority over his own mind and behavior. And with each successful engagement, each refusal to surrender to habit or emotion, he accumulated resilience, a growing sense of competence, a reinforced confidence that came not from accolades or recognition, but from the deep knowledge that he was, for the first time, the architect of his own life. And he began to understand that the essence of transformation lay precisely here, in the patient, almost invisible accumulation of disciplined, conscious action, repeated without fanfare, repeated without expectation of reward, repeated for the sake of integrity, mastery, and purpose itself. And he saw that the mind, once trained to act with intention, gradually shifted its default from passivity to action, from avoidance to engagement, from distraction to focus. And as this shift settled in, he realized the liberating truth that no external circumstance, no failure, no judgment, no sudden change in fortune could undo the work he was doing internally, that each deliberate choice built an irreversible foundation of power and control, and in this understanding, he found both courage and patience, the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead without fear or avoidance, and the patience to continue the quiet, methodical practice of aligning every moment with his deepest intentions, knowing that the long-term impact of these actions would eventually manifest as a life of coherence, autonomy, and resilience. A life in which he would no longer drift through existence, but navigate it with intentionality, presence, and the unshakable knowledge that the trajectory of his life, though invisible to others at first, was now fully in his hand, guided by nothing but the relentless commitment to act in alignment with his own principles. And that this, he realized, was the true measure of transformation, silent, internal, and entirely within his own control, a power that grew stronger with each day of deliberate, conscious living. As the weeks turned into months, he began to notice that the subtle, disciplined actions he had once questioned were beginning to compound into something far greater than he had anticipated. That each morning intentionally structured, each task completed despite internal resistance, each moment spent confronting boredom, frustration, or fear rather than fleeing from it, was not just an isolated act, but a thread in the intricate tapestry of a life being intentionally woven, and with this awareness came a deep understanding that transformation was not the result of grand gestures or sudden inspiration, but of the quiet, almost invisible accumulation of small, deliberate choices, repeated consistently and in expectation of reward, each one a negotiation with the self to prioritize purpose over ease, clarity over distraction, discipline over habit, and in observing himself in this way, he began to notice how the mind, when trained to act in alignment with intention, gradually shifted its default from passivity to engagement, from avoidance to confrontation, from fleeting impulses to sustained focus, and as this internal shift solidified, he felt an expanding sense of personal authority, the calm, unshakable knowledge that the trajectory of his life was no longer dictated by circumstance or the whims of motivation, but by the continuous, conscious application of his own choices. And yet, even as he celebrated these internal victories, he was acutely aware of the subtle resistance that arose again and again, the lure of distraction, the temptation to post the old patterns of self-deception that had shaped his past, and he met these challenges with an evolving patience, realizing that mastery was not about perfection, but about persistence, that strength was not measured by absence of struggle, but by the willingness to act in spite of it. And through this relentless, almost ritualistic practice of conscious engagement, he discovered a new rhythm to life, a tempo in which each day became both a test and a reinforcement. Each action a building block in a structure whose solidity was invisible to others, but profoundly felt within, and in this rhythm he began to experience the first true taste of freedom, the freedom of someone who no longer waits for life to happen, but shapes it deliberately, minute by minute, hour by year, day by day, recognizing that the external world may never notice the effort, may never reward the struggle, but that the internal transformation was irreversible, accumulating with each choice, each act of integrity, each confrontation with discomfort, until he could feel, in the quiet moments before sleep, the subtle but undeniable growth of resilience and self-governance. And with that, a profound realization settled over him. That the life he desired, one of purpose, control, and intentionality, was no longer hypothetical, no longer dependent on luck or circumstance, but actively being built with each deliberate decision, each conscious effort, each repeated act of discipline, and that the journey of transformation, long, arduous, and almost invisible from the outside, was in fact the very foundation of the person he was becoming. Someone capable not merely of surviving, but of living with integrity, direction, and an unshakable internal authority that no external force could undermine. And in this understanding, he found not just motivation, but conviction, patience, and a quiet, enduring power that carried him forward, silently reshaping his destiny moment by moment, choice by choice, until the man he had once been, passive and reactive, was replaced by someone fully awake, fully intentional, and fully committed to the continuous practice of becoming the person he had always imagined. As he continued to live with this newly cultivated awareness, he realized that each day was not merely a repetition of tasks, but a test of his capacity to remain intentional. That the mundane routines he had once endured without thought were now fertile ground for the cultivation of discipline, patience, and self-respect, and he began to observe the extraordinary power of consistency in the ordinary. Noticing how small, deliberate actions, repeated without fanfare or expectation, created a momentum that slowly reshaped not only his behavior, but his very perception of possibility. And with each passing week, he became more sensitive to the subtle ways in which old habits and unconscious patterns attempted to reclaim control. The seductive pull of procrastination, distraction, and comfort. Yet each time he recognized these impulses, he met them with a calm but firm resistance. Understanding that the mind's resistance was not an enemy, but a signal of progress, and that persistence in the face of this internal friction was the crucible in which character, strength, and resilience were forged. And as he maintained this relentless focus on conscious action, he began to notice a profound change in the texture of his inner life, a clarity and steadiness that had previously been absent, a quiet confidence that arose not from external validation, but from the undeniable knowledge that he was becoming the architect of his own existence. And he began to experience the subtle but transformative effects of this internal alignment. Decisions that once felt heavy and taxing now flowed with precision. Tasks that had once been avoided now became opportunities to reinforce self-trust. And moments of discomfort no longer induced fear, but were welcomed as essential catalysts for growth. And in this evolving practice, he realized that the true measure of transformation was not found in dramatic successes or external recognition, but in the silent, visible consistency of deliberate choices made in alignment with one's highest values, repeated day after day, minute by minute, until the patterns of the past lost their power and a new framework for life emerged. One governed not by impulse, habit, or circumstance, but by conscious, intentional, and disciplined engagement with reality. And he understood that this was the rarest form of freedom, the freedom to shape his own destiny through deliberate action, to act with clarity, focus, and integrity regardless of external condition, that in this practice lay a power that was both subtle and unstoppable. Because once the mind and body are trained to act with intention continuously, they create a trajectory of life that cannot be derailed by circumstance, distraction, or temporary setback. And as he reflected on the months of quiet, repetitive effort, he recognized that this internal authority was the foundation for everything he sought: purpose, autonomy, resilience, and fulfillment. And that by committing to live each day with this level of conscious engagement, he was not only transforming his present, but irreversibly shaping his future moment by moment, choice by choice, until the man he had once been, passive and reactive, had been replaced by someone awake, deliberate, and fully in command of his life, capable of facing any challenge, to enduring any discomfort, and navigating any obstacle with patience, clarity, and unwavering internal power. And in this awareness, he found a profound, quiet satisfaction, not the fleeting joy of external reward, but the enduring peace of someone who has discovered that transformation is a practice, a daily discipline, and ultimately a lifelong commitment to becoming the person one was always meant to be. As he moved further into this disciplined rhythm of life, he began to notice the profound interconnection between thought, action, and consequence, realizing that every seemingly insignificant choice carried weight, that the hours he once allowed to slip away unnoticed were in fact the building blocks of either stagnation or growth, and that the cumulative impact of these choices, repeated day after day with conscious intention, created an internal architecture of strength and direction that was invisible to others but undeniable to himself. And with this understanding came a deep sense of responsibility, a recognition that the trajectory of his life was now entirely within his control, contingent only on his ability to sustain focus, to honor his commitments, and to act consistently in alignment with his highest values. And he began to see the subtle ways in which distraction, comfort, and old habits sought to reclaim their influence, how easy it was to drift back into reactive patterns, to let the mind wander, to surrender to impulses that once ruled his hours without resistance. Yet each time he met these internal challenges with conscious action, he strengthened the neural pathways of discipline, reinforcing the habit of intentionality until it became the default mode of his existence. And as this foundation solidified, he began to experience a profound shift in perception, seeing obstacles not as insurmountable barriers, but as opportunities to exercise control, patience, and resilience. And he realized that the external world, with its chaos, unpredictability, and demands, no longer dictated his mood, his energy, or his focus, because the internal systems he had built through countless small choices made with awareness acted as a stabilizing force, a constant anchor amidst turbulence. And he began to notice the subtle effects of this change in his interactions with others, in his work, in the way he approached challenges and setbacks, recognizing that his decisions were no longer reactive but deliberate, that his life was no longer a product of circumstance but of conscious design. And he understood the profound truth that the slow accumulation of disciplined action, of self-directed effort, repeated without pause, was more powerful than any fleeting inspiration, any external validation, any temporary surge of motivation, and that the practice of transformation was, in fact, a lifelong commitment to observe oneself honestly, act deliberately, confront discomfort, resist avoidance, and continuously align thought and action with one's highest principles. And in this, he found not just competence, but confidence, not just control, but freedom, the freedom that comes from knowing that each day, each moment, each decision could be harnessed to intentionally shape the trajectory of one's life, and that as long as he maintained this vigilance, the force of these deliberate, repeated actions would grow cumulatively, invisibly at first, but inevitably to create a life of integrity, purpose, resilience, and autonomy, a life in which he would no longer drift, react, or surrender to circumstances, but act with consistent intention and focus until the man he had once been, passive and reactive, had been replaced by someone awake, deliberate, and fully in command of his destiny, capable of enduring discomfort, navigating uncertainty, and continuously building a foundation of internal power that no external force could ever erode. And in this understanding, he discovered a quiet, enduring satisfaction, a sense of mastery born not of sudden victories or recognition, but of the relentless, patient practice of aligning every thought, every action, every choice with the life he intended to live. And in this awareness, he felt both grounded and free, fully awake to the power of the present and the infinite potential of every deliberate decision. As he continued this relentless practice of conscious living, he began to perceive life itself as a series of moments laden with choice, each one offering either the opportunity to reinforce passivity and habit, or to exercise intention, discipline, and self-mastery. And he discovered that the power of transformation lay not in the dramatic, the extraordinary, or the externally visible, but in the quiet, cumulative, almost imperceptible repetition of deliberate actions taken with full awareness. And he became increasingly attuned to the subtle ways in which the mind, once accustomed to passivity, resisted this new rhythm, conjuring excuses, distractions, and fears in order to reclaim its familiar patterns. Yet he met each internal challenge not with self-criticism or impatience, but with measured observation, understanding that every act of resistance he overcame, every moment in which he chose intentionality over ease, strengthened the neural and psychological pathways of self-discipline, gradually rewiring his perception, his impulses, and his responses so that decision-making became less reactive and more aligned with his deepest values and long-term vision. And as he maintained this vigilance, he began to notice a profound internal shift. Clarity, focus, and resilience were becoming habitual, integrity became a default, and patience grew into a constant companion, allowing him to approach challenges, setbacks, and uncertainty with a calm, steady mind, unshaken by external chaos or immediate failure. And he began to understand that this internal alignment was more valuable than any external validation or recognition, for it created a sense of unshakable power, freedom, and self-reliance, a foundation upon which he could navigate life with intentionality, purpose, and presence. And through this growing mastery of himself, he observed how every previously wasted moment, every surrendered opportunity, every concession to distraction had contributed to the life he had once quietly lamented, while now each deliberate action, each conscious choice, each refusal to succumb to old habits was steadily constructing a life aligned with his true intention. And he recognized the paradox that transformation was both simple and extraordinarily difficult. Simple because it required nothing more than consistent, deliberate action, and difficult because it required confronting every internal resistance, every comfort, every instinctive pull toward ease. Yet he persisted day after day, hour after hour, minute by minute, understanding that this persistence, though invisible to the world at first, was quietly, irreversibly shaping the trajectory of his existence. And in this, he experienced the profound satisfaction of mastery, the quiet, enduring joy that arises not from fleeting victories or applause, but from knowing that every deliberate, conscious choice reinforced the life he was building, that the momentum of intentional action was unstoppable, cumulative, and irrevocable, and that the man he had once been, passive, reactive, and unaware, was being transformed into someone fully awake, deliberate, and fully capable of steering his own destiny, able to endure discomfort, navigate uncertainty, and continuously build a foundation of internal power that no external circumstance could undermine. And in this awareness, he found a deep, abiding sense of freedom, purpose, and control, a freedom born from the mastery of self, a life deliberately designed, moment by moment, choice by choice, fully aligned with his highest values and intentions. And in this continuous quiet practice, he realized that the journey of transformation was in itself the ultimate source of power, resilience, and fulfillment. As the days, weeks, and months continued to unfold, he began to understand the profound impact of sustained, conscious effort on every dimension of his life, recognizing that transformation was not a single event, but a continuous, deliberate engagement with each moment. And he observed how the smallest actions repeated consistently accumulated into a powerful internal momentum that reshaped his habits, his perception, and his capacity for self-mastery. And he noticed that the mind, once accustomed to passivity and ease, constantly generated subtle resistance, temptations to procrastinate, to distract, to comfort himself with excuses. Yet each time he met this resistance with awareness and intentional action, he strengthened the foundations of his discipline, slowly rewiring his behavior so that deliberate choice became habitual and automatic. And as he honed this skill, he experienced an increasing clarity in his understanding of cause and effect, seeing that every thought, every decision, every effort contributed either to stagnation or growth, and he became meticulous in aligning each action with his highest values, structuring his mornings, his hours, and his responses to challenges with conscious purpose, knowing that even when the external world remained chaotic, uncertain, or unsupportive, the internal structures he was building through repeated, deliberate action would act as a stabilizing force, a source of unshakable strength and guidance. And as he continued to practice this level of conscious engagement, he observed a profound shift in his perception. Obstacles were no longer threats, but opportunities to exercise patience, resilience, and focus. Discomfort was no longer feared, but embraced as necessary for growth, and the very act of living intentionally became a source of energy and fulfillment, replacing the previous pattern of passive existence. And in this practice, he realized the ultimate paradox of transformation, that the path was simple in principle, act with awareness, consistency, and integrity, but extraordinarily challenging in execution because it required confronting every habitual tendency toward ease, distraction, and avoidance. Yet the cumulative effect of this daily vigilance was undeniable, invisible externally at first, but internally powerful and irreversible, creating a life in which he was no longer governed by circumstance, emotion, or fleeting motivation, but by the deliberate alignment of thought, intention, and action, and he felt an enduring satisfaction in this mastery. A quiet confidence born not from recognition or reward, but from the knowledge that he was actively building a foundation of autonomy, resilience, and purpose, moment by moment, choice by choice, until the verse he had once been passive and unaware had been replaced by someone fully awake, fully intentional, and fully capable of steering his own destiny, someone who could endure discomfort, navigate uncertainty, confront fear, and continuously reinforce the structures of self-discipline that would govern the rest of his life. And in this, he discovered the true essence of transformation, that it is not found in external change or fleeting inspiration, but in the relentless, patient, daily practice of aligning every thought, every action, every decision with the life one intends to live, building an internal authority so powerful that no external circumstance could ever undermine it, and that through this he had unlocked the freedom, control, and fulfillment he had once only imagined, a freedom forged quietly, consistently, and intentionally, one conscious choice at a time. As the months of deliberate practice accumulated, he began to experience a subtle but undeniable transformation in his perception of time, energy, and personal agency, noticing that each conscious decision, however small, was like a seed planted, slowly taking root and influencing subsequent actions in ways that were initially invisible but eventually undeniable. And he observed that the mind, once accustomed to drifting, had begun to respond differently to challenge, discomfort, and opportunity, instinctively seeking alignment with intention rather than defaulting to distraction or avoidance. And with this growing internal coherence came a profound sense of empowerment, the realization that life was not something that happened to him, but something he actively shaped moment by moment, choice by choice, and he began to apply this understanding not only to his daily routines, but to every dimension of existence, observing how even minor interactions, decisions, and commitments now carried weight, how consistency and integrity in small matters reinforced the capacity to act decisively in larger ones. And he discovered that the external world, with its unpredictable circumstances and inevitable challenges, no longer dictated his inner state, because the foundation he had built through persistent, intentional action served as an anchor, allowing him to navigate obstacles with patience, clarity, and calm. And he began to notice that the subtle victories of discipline and alignment created a compounding effect, reinforcing confidence, resilience, and self-trust. And he saw clearly that transformation was not dramatic or instantaneous, but a slow, cumulative process, a weaving together of countless deliberate choices, each reinforcing the next, until the sum of these actions created a life aligned with his highest values. And he felt an enduring satisfaction in this quiet internal mastery, a sense of power and freedom that arose not from recognition, external success, or fleeting motivation, but from the unwavering knowledge that he was fully responsible for his trajectory, that no circumstance could undo the momentum created by repeated, conscious engagement, and he recognized that the essence of self-mastery and transformation lay precisely in this relentless, patient, and consistent practice of intentional living, confronting discomfort rather than avoiding it, sustaining focus rather than yielding to distraction, and honoring his commitments to himself with the same seriousness as he would honor obligations to others. And in this, he found a profound sense of peace, control, and purpose, understanding that each day, each hour, each deliberate action was a building block, shaping a life not merely survived, but consciously and intentionally constructed, and that the man he had once been, passive and reactive, had been replaced by someone fully awake, fully intentional, and fully capable of navigating life with clarity and resilience. An unwavering internal authority, and this awareness alone, built through months of persistent, deliberate practice, became the cornerstone of a life that was not dictated by circumstance, chance, or fleeting inspiration, but by the deliberate alignment of thought and intention, creating a trajectory of growth, fulfillment, and freedom that would continue to expand as long as he remained committed to the practice of living consciously, moment by moment, choice. By the time he had reached this point in his journey, he began to fully grasp the extraordinary power of consistency, patience, and deliberate action, realizing that transformation was not an event to be awaited or a sudden burst of motivation to be relied upon, but a continuous, methodical, and conscious engagement with every aspect of life, in which each decision, each thought, and each action, no matter how small, contributed either to growth or to stagnation, and he became increasingly aware of the invisible patterns that had previously governed his behavior, the automatic habits of avoidance, distraction, and procrastination that had subtly dictated the flow of his days, and he saw clearly that the very same moments which had once been wasted, when approached with intention, could serve as opportunities to build resilience, discipline, and self-trust, and he began to treat each day as a laboratory of personal mastery, observing his own tendencies without judgment, intervening with conscious choice, and gradually reshaping the default responses of his mind and body to align with his highest principles. And as he maintained this practice, he noticed a profound internal shift. Focus became habitual, clarity became a constant companion, patience strengthened, and the previously elusive sense of self-control and authority over his own life was no longer theoretical, but lived tangible and undeniable. And he observed how even in the face of external chaos, setbacks, and uncertainty, he could remain anchored, deliberate, and composed, because the internal structures he had built through relentless, repeated, and conscious effort provided a stable foundation, and he understood that this was the real freedom, the freedom that comes not from favorable circumstances, luck, or sudden inspiration, but from the cultivation of self-mastery through persistent, intentional action. And he began to experience the compounding effects of this internal alignment. Decisions flowed more smoothly, challenges were met with composure, opportunities were seized rather than ignored, and the subtle energy of consistent effort created a cumulative momentum that reshaped his perception of possibility, his relationship with time, and his capacity to create results. And he realized the paradox of transformation. It is both simple and profound. Simple because it requires nothing more than repeated, conscious engagement with life, and profound because it demands unwavering vigilance over every thought, every action, every impulse. And in meeting this challenge, he discovered the depth of his own resilience, the extent of his own potential, and the limitless power that comes from aligning thought, action, and intention consistently over time. And he felt an enduring satisfaction, a quiet confidence, and a deep sense of liberation, knowing that the life he had long imagined of purpose, clarity, control, and fulfillment was now actively being built moment by moment, choice by choice, and that the man he had once been, passive, reactive, and unaware, had been transformed into someone fully awake, fully deliberate, and fully capable of shaping his own destiny, someone who could navigate discomfort, uncertainty, and challenge with unwavering resolve, And in this realization, he understood the true essence of transformation, that it is neither instantaneous nor externally granted, but cultivated, internal, and entirely within his own power, realized through the patient, persistent, conscious practice of living intentionally, day after day, moment by moment, with every choice aligned to the life he wished to create, until the momentum of deliberate action became unstoppable, irrevocable, and the foundation for a life of enduring fulfillment, mastery, and freedom. As he continued on this path of relentless self-observation and deliberate action, he began to realize the profound truth that transformation is less about achieving immediate results and more about cultivating a state of consistent, conscious engagement with life, where every thought, decision, and action is acknowledged, assessed, and aligned with his highest values. And he noticed how the mind, trained for years to seek comfort and avoid discomfort, instinctively resisted this new discipline, conjuring excuses, distractions, and fears to pull him back into old familiar patterns. Yet with each instance in which he recognized these impulses and chose action over avoidance, intentionality over ease, he felt the invisible threads of his life being rewoven, the habits that had silently governed his days replaced by deliberate routines that reinforced clarity, focus, and resilience. And he understood that this process, though invisible and painstakingly gradual, was the true foundation of freedom. For when internal alignment is cultivated with patience and consistency, no external circumstance, no setback, and no momentary lapse in motivation can derail the trajectory of a life purposefully built. And as he observed himself navigating these daily choices, he became acutely aware of the power inherent in small, repeated actions. The single morning started without distraction, the single task completed despite resistance, the single moment spent sitting with discomfort rather than fleeing, each a micro decision with compounding consequences. And he realized that the aggregation of these moments was far more influential than any dramatic effort or sudden burst of willpower could ever be, creating an internal momentum that reshaped his perception of possibility, strengthened his capacity to act in alignment with intention, gradually rewired his mind to favor disciplined action over instinctive ease. And through this accumulation of conscious choices, he began to feel a subtle but undeniable transformation in every dimension of his life. He noticed more clarity in his thinking, greater energy in his actions, increased patience in the face of obstacles, and a deepening sense of self-trust that anchored him even when external circumstances were uncertain or chaotic. And he began to see that this internal foundation allowed him to navigate challenges with a steady, composed presence, turning moments of adversity into opportunities to exercise resilience, focus, and strategic thinking. And even the smallest acts, keeping a promise to himself, completing a difficult task, choosing discomfort over comfort, delaying gratification, were amplified in their impact, reinforcing a cycle of self-mastery, intentionality, and long-term progress. And as he maintained this vigilance, he noticed an extraordinary shift in his perception of life itself. Recognizing that what he had once thought of as ordinary, repetitive, or mundane was actually the canvas upon which transformation was painted, that the accumulation of deliberate action across days, weeks, and months created a trajectory of growth, purpose, and fulfillment that no external force could interrupt us. And he began to integrate this awareness into every aspect of his existence, structuring his mornings, his hours, his responses, and even his mindset in alignment with this principle until each day became a coherent, intentional sequence of actions, each reinforcing the next. And he felt a quiet but profound satisfaction in the realization that the life he had once drifted through, passive, reactive, and unaware, was now being deliberately constructed moment by moment, choice by choice, and that the man he had become, disciplined, intentional, aware, and resilient, was no longer at the mercy of circumstance, emotion, or fleeting motivation, but fully capable of steering his own destiny with clarity, patience, and unwavering internal authority. And in this understanding, he discovered the ultimate truth of transformation, that it is neither instant nor externally granted, but cultivated internally through patient, consistent, conscious engagement with every element of life until the momentum of deliberate action, once invisible and subtle, becomes unstoppable, irrevocable, and creates a life defined by mastery, freedom, purpose, and enduring fulfillment, a life in which every decision, thought, and action contributes to the person he continuously becomes, fully awake, fully intentional, and fully capable of shaping a future aligned with his highest principle. As he pressed further into this disciplined, intentional way of living, he began to perceive life as an intricate web of choices, where every seemingly trivial decision held the potential to either fortify the foundations of his growth or slowly erode them. And he realized that the real power of transformation was hidden in the mundane, in the ordinary moments that most people overlooked or surrendered to distraction, for it was in consistently choosing awareness over autopilot, effort over ease, and purpose over impulse that he began to experience the true compounding effects of conscious living, and he became increasingly sensitive to the subtle signals of his mind attempting to revert to old patterns. The gentle tug of comfort, the whisper of procrastination, the fleeting desire to disengage, but instead of resisting these signals with force or judgment, he met them with recognition, understanding that each impulse was a guidepost, revealing where attention and discipline were most required. And he learned to harness these moments, transforming them into opportunities to practice deliberate choice, to exercise patience, to build resilience, and to reinforce the neural and psychological pathways that supported intentional action. And as this pattern continued, he noticed that the internal transformation began to manifest externally, subtly yet undeniably, in the way he approached challenges, handled relationships, managed time, and responded to uncertainty. And he felt the growing sense of freedom that arises not from external circumstances, but from internal mastery. The unshakable confidence that comes from knowing he could navigate any situation with clarity, integrity, and focus, because the foundation had been quietly built over countless hours of deliberate effort. And he observed how even minor actions, waking early, completing a difficult task, maintaining focus during moments of boredom, choosing discomfort over distraction, carried a weight far greater than he had ever imagined, creating a cascading effect that influenced subsequent decisions, strengthened self-trust, and reinforced the identity of someone fully capable of shaping his life intentionally. And he realized that the accumulation of these small acts was the very essence of lasting transformation. For while dramatic change may capture attention, it was the silent, consistent, repeated practice of conscious living that ultimately determined the trajectory of a life. And as he integrated this principle into every dimension of his existence, his routines, relationships, work, and inner dialogue, he began to operate from a place of alignment rather than reaction, from purpose rather than habit, and from mastery rather than surrender. He found a profound satisfaction in observing the cumulative impact of these choices, recognizing that the man he had once been, reactive, passive, and unaware, was giving way to someone fully awake, fully intentional, and fully empowered, someone who could confront discomfort, endure uncertainty, and navigate challenges with a composure and clarity previously unimaginable. And in this awareness, he discovered the deepest truth of transformation, that it is cultivated through patient, consistent, deliberate action, moment by moment, choice by choice, until the momentum of intentional living becomes invisible but unstoppable, quietly reshaping thought, action, and character, creating a life defined by purpose, integrity, freedom, and enduring fulfillment, a life in which every decision contributes to the continuous formation of a stronger, wiser, more capable self, fully awake to the immense potential of conscious, deliberate action. As he continued immersing himself in this practice of conscious, deliberate living, he began to notice an even deeper layer of awareness unfolding within him, a recognition that every single moment, regardless of how small or seemingly inconsequential, held immense potential for shaping his life. And he observed that the mind, previously trained to operate on autopilot, was now beginning to respond to intentional action with increasing ease, gradually aligning thoughts, emotions, and behaviors toward purposeful, deliberate outcomes. And he became acutely aware of the invisible but relentless forces that had once directed his life: habit, comfort, fear, distraction, and he saw clearly how easily the trajectory of his existence had been shaped by these forces before he had consciously intervened. And in realizing this, he understood the profound responsibility inherent in every choice, every action, and every thought, and he committed himself to engage fully with each, recognizing that it was through this consistent, mindful engagement that the architecture of a transformed life was constructed. And he began to treat each day as a laboratory, each moment as an experiment in alignment, each challenge as an opportunity to exercise focus, discipline, patience, and resilience. And he observed how the repeated practice of deliberate choice gradually rewired his mind, replacing reactive patterns with proactive, intentional ones, so that decision making became instinctively aligned with his highest principles. And as he maintained this pattern, he began to experience profound internal shifts. Clarity replaced confusion, patience replaced impulsivity, resilience replaced fragility, and a deep sense of self-trust emerged, anchoring him in ways that no external circumstance could disrupt. And he noticed that even the smallest acts, rising early, completing tasks before procrastination, could intervene, sitting with discomfort rather than fleeing, maintaining focus despite fatigue or distraction, accumulated into an invisible but powerful momentum, reinforcing his identity as someone capable of mastering himself, navigating challenges with composure, and living with intentionality. And he realized that the compounding effect of these seemingly minor actions was extraordinary, creating a trajectory that transformed not only his external life, but his internal reality, aligning perception, action, and purpose in a way that fostered autonomy, freedom, and enduring fulfillment. And he began to operate from this foundation, noticing how every interaction, decision, and endeavor now reflected intentionality and integrity, how external chaos no longer dictated his internal state, and how he could navigate uncertainty, adversity, and opportunity with calm, strategic focus. And as this awareness deepened, he recognized the ultimate truth of transformation. It is neither instantaneous nor externally conferred, but cultivated through relentless, consistent, deliberate practice, through the conscious accumulation of aligned actions, repeated day after day, moment by moment, choice by choice, until the trajectory of one's life is irreversibly shaped by the internal authority and mastery that comes from this practice. And he felt a quiet but profound satisfaction, knowing that the man he had once been, reactive, distracted, and unaware, was being replaced by someone fully awake, fully deliberate, and fully capable of creating a life defined by purpose, resilience, freedom, and the continuous realization of his highest potential. And he understood that the momentum generated through this disciplined, intentional engagement would continue to compound indefinitely, creating a life that was not merely survived, but consciously, intentionally, and irreversibly built. As he continued to live with this heightened awareness and relentless commitment to intentionality, he began to sense a profound shift in the very fabric of his existence, noticing that every thought, action, and moment of attention carried far more weight than he had ever imagined. And he realized that life itself is a vast network of cause and effect, where even the smallest, seemingly inconsequential decisions contribute cumulatively to the trajectory of one's destiny. And he observed how the mind, once ruled by habit, distraction, and comfort, gradually became a responsive instrument of deliberate choice, capable of aligning perception, emotion, and action toward his highest goals. And he recognized the extraordinary power of consistency, the quiet compounding effect of repeated conscious action, and he marveled at how simple yet profound the principle of intentional living truly was, for it required nothing more than a willingness to observe oneself, confront discomfort, resist impulses toward ease, and continuously act in alignment with one's deepest values. And he began to integrate this principle into every facet of life, from his daily routines to his long-term goals, from his internal dialogue to his external interactions, recognizing that the deliberate structuring of each day, each hour, each decision, each moment of focus created a ripple effect, reinforcing self-trust, resilience, and mastery. And he noticed that even the smallest victories, such as completing a difficult task, resisting distraction, or maintaining composure under pressure, carried a profound cumulative weight, gradually shaping his identity, his habits, and the quality of his experiences. And he realized that the transformation he sought was not external but internal, a process of reshaping the mind and character so that external circumstances no longer dictated his state. And he found that this internal authority allowed him to navigate uncertainty, adversity, and challenge with composure, strategic focus, and confidence. And as he continued this practice, he began to see life itself as an extension of this discipline, recognizing that each interaction, choice, and engagement presented an opportunity to reinforce his alignment, to exercise patience, resilience, and deliberate action. And he observed that the long-term impact of these repeated, mindful actions was extraordinary, generating momentum that became increasingly self-sustaining, shaping his experiences, his opportunities, and ultimately the trajectory of his life in ways that were invisible at first but undeniable over time. And he understood the paradoxical nature of transformation. It is both simple and demanding, simple because it rests on consistent intentional action, and demanding because it requires unwavering vigilance, confronting every impulse toward distraction, comfort, or procrastination. Yet the rewards of this practice were extraordinary, manifesting as clarity, composure, freedom, resilience, and a profound sense of self-mastery. And he felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who has discovered that the accumulation of deliberate, conscious choices is far more powerful than any external circumstance, fleeting motivation, or sudden inspiration. And he recognized that the man he had once been, passive and unaware, was being replaced by someone fully awake, fully intentional, and fully capable of creating a life defined by purpose, freedom, and enduring fulfillment. And he understood that this momentum, once cultivated, was unstoppable, compounding invisibly yet powerfully to ensure that the trajectory of his life would continue to align with the principles he had chosen to live by, moment by moment, choice by choice, creating a reality in which every thought and decision reinforced the highest version of himself and the life he had intentionally set out to construct. As he delved deeper into this ongoing practice of conscious, intentional living, he began to perceive life itself as a vast landscape of interconnected choices, each moment offering a subtle but powerful opportunity to either reinforce the trajectory of growth and mastery or to succumb to the familiar patterns of comfort, distraction, and inaction. And he noticed that the mind, once accustomed to passivity and autopilot behavior, was gradually responding differently to these repeated interventions, increasingly favoring alignment, focus, and deliberate action. And he realized that the accumulation of these small, deliberate decisions, whether it was rising early, focusing on a challenging task despite fatigue, sitting with discomfort instead of fleeing, or making choices in alignment with his highest principles, was quietly, invisibly shaping his identity, building a foundation of resilience, self-trust, and internal authority that no external circumstance could dismantle. And he began to recognize the extraordinary compounding power inherent in this continuous practice, noticing that the momentum generated by these repeated acts created a subtle but unstoppable trajectory toward mastery, purpose, and fulfillment. And he understood that this internal architecture of deliberate choice was the true measure of transformation, far beyond fleeting motivation, external recognition, or temporary bursts of effort. And he began to see that the ordinary moments he had once overlooked, the mundane, the repetitive, the seemingly trivial, were in fact the most fertile ground for building a life of extraordinary exturgency, integrity, and growth. And he treated each day as an opportunity to reinforce these principles, aligning every thought, every action, every decision with the long-term vision of who he intended to become. And he observed how this internal discipline began to influence every aspect of his life, his relationships, his work, his responses to challenges, in his capacity to maintain focus and clarity even in chaos. And he noticed that the subtle victories of consistent, intentional living, though often invisible to the outside world, generated an internal satisfaction and sense of power that far exceeded any external reward, and he began to understand the paradoxical nature of transformation. It is simultaneously simple and demanding, simple because it rests on consistent, deliberate action, yet demanding because it requires continuous vigilance over thoughts, impulses, and behaviors that have been ingrained for years. Yet he embraced this challenge, seeing every resistance, every discomfort, and every obstacle as a necessary and valuable component of the practice, knowing that each time he overcame an impulse toward distraction, comfort, or procrastination, he reinforced the structures of self-mastery, and he felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of someone building a life deliberately, step by step, moment by moment, choice by choice, understanding that the cumulative effect of these repeated intentional actions would ultimately define the trajectory of his life, creating a reality in which he was no longer passive or reactive, but fully awake, fully intentional, and fully empowered to navigate uncertainty, adversity, and opportunity with clarity, focus, and unwavering internal authority. And he realized that this momentum, once cultivated, would continue to compound, generating resilience, freedom, purpose, and fulfillment in ways that were invisible at first, but undeniable over time, solidifying the man he had become as someone fully capable of shaping his destiny and living a life aligned with his highest vision. And in this realization, he felt a profound sense of liberation, mastery, and enduring confidence, knowing that every deliberate choice, every conscious effort, and every intentional action was contributing to the life he had always imagined and was now actively creating moment by moment, choice by choice. As he continued this unwavering practice of conscious living, he began to perceive life in a completely new light, realizing that every thought, every action, and every choice, no matter how seemingly insignificant, carried with it the power to shape his future. And he noticed that the compounding effect of consistent, deliberate action was gradually transforming the very structure of his mind, rewiring habits, impulses, and automatic reactions into patterns that consistently aligned with his highest values. And he understood that true transformation was not the result of sudden breakthroughs, external validation, or fleeting inspiration, but the accumulation of countless small acts of intentionality, repeated day after day, hour after hour, moment by moment, and he began to observe how even ordinary, mundane routines, when approached with awareness and purpose, could generate extraordinary momentum over time, each act reinforcing self-trust, discipline, resilience, and focus, and he realized that the internal authority he was cultivating allowed him to navigate life with a sense of freedom and mastery that no external circumstance could undermine. For he had learned to anchor himself in deliberate choice rather than in fleeting emotion or reactive behavior. And as he practiced this vigilance, he began to notice subtle but profound shifts in his perception. Obstacles became opportunities for growth, discomfort became a training ground for patience and strength, and challenges that once seemed overwhelming were now approached with clarity, strategy, and composure. And he observed that even minor victories, resisting distraction, completing difficult tasks, maintaining focus in moments of fatigue, had ripple effects that strengthened his identity as a deliberate, intentional, and resilient individual. And he came to understand that the trajectory of a life of mastery is created not by extraordinary events or dramatic achievements, but by the steady, invisible accumulation of consistent, conscious effort, and he began to structure his days, interactions, and decisions around this principle, ensuring that each moment reinforced the alignment between intention, action, and purpose, and he realized that the ordinary moments he had once dismissed as trivial were in fact the most powerful opportunities for transformation, and that the continuous practice of intentional living created an internal momentum so strong that it began to shape his external reality, influencing his relationships, work, opportunities, and responses to challenge, and he felt a profound satisfaction in recognizing that the man he had once been passive, reactive, and unaware was being replaced by someone fully awake, deliberate, and fully capable of navigating life with clarity, focus, and resilience. And he understood that this momentum, once cultivated through persistent, intentional action, would continue to compound, reinforcing freedom, self-mastery, and purpose indefinitely. And that every decision, every deliberate effort, every conscious choice was a building block in the life he was intentionally creating. It is a life defined not by circumstance or fleeting motivation, but by sustained alignment with his highest principles until the trajectory of his life became unstoppable, irreversible, and fully representative of the person he had committed himself to becoming. Fully awake, fully intentional, fully empowered, and fully alive in every moment. As he progressed further into this disciplined practice of conscious, intentional living, he began to fully appreciate the extraordinary power of repeated, deliberate action, recognizing that transformation is not achieved through sporadic effort or fleeting inspiration, but through the patient, consistent, and continuous engagement with every moment. And he noticed that each small choice, rising early, completing a task despite resistance, focusing during moments of fatigue, embracing discomfort rather than avoiding it, created invisible ripples that compounded over time, gradually reshaping his mind, habits, and entire approach to life. And he realized that these repeated acts of intentionality were the very mechanism by which self-mastery is cultivated, for it is through continuous practice that the mind, once conditioned by distraction, habit, and comfort, is rewired to favor clarity, discipline, resilience, and purposeful action, and he began to perceive life itself as a series of opportunities, each moment presenting a chance to reinforce alignment with his highest values. And he observed the internal authority he was developing enabled him to navigate challenges, setbacks, and uncertainty with calm, strategic focus and unwavering composure, and he felt a profound of freedom that comes not from external circumstances, but from mastery over the self. For he understood that no obstacle, no chaos, and no unexpected event could derail the trajectory of a life constructed through consistent, conscious effort. And as he maintained this practice, he noticed the subtle yet powerful ways in which momentum accumulated, how each deliberate choice reinforced the next, and how the invisible compounding of intentional actions shaped not only his internal state, but also the external quality of his life, influencing his relationships, work, opportunities, and overall sense of purpose. And he came to realize the paradoxical nature of transformation. It is simultaneously simple in principle, act with awareness, consistency and alignment, and demanding in execution, requiring vigilance, self-reflection, and the courage to confront discomfort and old habits. Yet he embraced this challenge fully, seeing every moment of resistance as a necessary component of growth, and he began to experience a profound internal satisfaction and sense of mastery, recognizing that the life he had once drifted through, passively, unaware, and reactive, was now being intentionally, deliberately, and irreversibly shaped by his own conscious choices. And he felt a quiet but deep confidence in the momentum of his actions, understanding that each choice, each act of intentionality, each moment of alignment was building a foundation that could not be undone by circumstance, and that this cumulative practice of living intentionally moment by moment, choice by choice, was creating a life of resilience, freedom, purpose, and enduring fulfillment, a life fully aligned with the highest vision of himself, in which he could navigate uncertainty, adversity, and opportunity with unwavering clarity, focus, and empowerment, fully awake to the immense potential inherent in each deliberate, conscious action, and fully capable of creating the future he had committed himself to manifest. As he reached this final stage of his ongoing journey of conscious, intentional living, he began to see the full tapestry of transformation woven through each deliberate choice, each act of awareness, and each moment in which he refused to succumb to comfort, distraction, or autopilot behavior. And he understood that the life he now experienced, the life of clarity, focus, resilience, and purpose, was not the result of luck, external circumstances, or fleeting inspiration, but the direct consequence of countless repeated decisions made day after day, moment by moment, choice by choice, and he recognized that this cumulative process, though often invisible in the short term, had become an unstoppable force, shaping his identity, habits, relationships, and destiny in ways that were profound and irreversible. And he noticed that the subtle shifts in perception, patience, and self-trust that had been cultivated over months and years now served as a guiding compass, allowing him to navigate challenges, uncertainty, and adversity with composure, clarity, and strategic focus. And he observed that even the smallest victories, maintaining discipline in routine tasks, resisting the lure of distraction, completing difficult work despite fatigue, embracing discomfort rather than avoiding it, had compounded over time to create a momentum that now powered every aspect of his life, reinforcing alignment between thought, intention, and action. And he realized that the external world, with all its chaos, unpredictability, and demands, no longer dictated his state of mind, for the internal architecture he had constructed through persistent, conscious effort acted as a stabilizing anchor, and he began to see the paradoxical beauty of transformation. It is simultaneously simple and profoundly demanding. Simple because it rests on repeated, intentional engagement with life, and demanding because it requires constant vigilance, self-reflection, and the courage to confront every impulse toward ease, avoidance, or distraction. Yet he embraced this challenge fully, knowing that each moment of resistance was an opportunity to reinforce self-mastery, discipline, and purposeful living, and he felt the quiet, enduring satisfaction of someone who has taken full responsibility for their life, recognizing that the accumulation of deliberate, conscious choices created a trajectory of freedom, autonomy, purpose, and fulfillment that could not be undone by circumstance, fleeting motivation, or external events. And he observed that the life he now led, a life fully awake, intentional, and aligned with his highest values, was the manifestation of every small, consistent action he had taken over time, a living testament to the principle that true transformation is the result of persistent, patient, and conscious practice. And he understood that this momentum, once established, would continue to compound, shaping his future indefinitely, and he experienced a profound sense of liberation, mastery, and confidence, knowing that each deliberate choice, every act of intentionality, and every moment of awareness contributed to building a life defined by integrity, resilience, purpose, and enduring fulfillment, until the man he had once been, reactive, passive, and unaware, had been fully replaced by someone capable of living intentionally, fully awake, fully empowered, and fully aligned with the life he had always envisioned. And in this, he realized the ultimate truth, that the journey of transformation is lifelong, continuing, and infinitely rewarding, a journey in which each moment, each decision, and each action is both the path and the destination. And that through this unwavering commitment to conscious, deliberate living, he had unlocked the full potential of his existence, creating a life of freedom, mastering, and purpose that would continue to grow, compound, and inspire with every moment, every choice, and every breath.